Eli, welcome. Happy you're joining us, and tell us a little bit about your background and experience.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. Wow. So this question is usually like a 30 to 60-second question. For me, it's more like 8 to 10 minutes. So just hang in there. So my journey, I kind of grew up in a very different than typical background. Grew up in a ultra orthodox family of 10. I'm number two, so kind of grew up in this weird reality. Just an hour from the city, but not having any kind of real access to any of that stuff, living in a little bubble. At the age of like 14, 15, I came across this website called Reddit, which was absolutely mind blowing. And I was like, you can learn about anything. And at that point in time, I had a couple of friends that were a couple of years older than me that came across this thing called credit card points and miles and just hanging with me. But they basically were traveling the world for free. And I was like, that makes zero sense. But I was going to believe anything. And I was like, let me kind of figure this out. And I moved to New York when I was like 17 or 18. And I walked into a Chase Bank and I told the manager, like, I really need to learn about this thing called credit. And he's like, okay, do you have a bank account? I said, I got nothing. Like, I need all the way start from zero and take me to 100. And pretty much a year later, I had put together over 1 million miles and kind of started just traveling. At this point in time, I had like no real education, no background other than the community I was in. And I just started traveling and seeing things and had about $100 in my bank account, but a whole bunch of miles. So staying in these gorgeous hotels and eating Burger King. So I got to this point where I realized I'm kind of at a crossroads where I can either kind of go back to the community I started from and find a job in one of their companies, or kind of really try to discover my passion. At that point in time, I said, okay, there's not that many industries in this world that give somebody a chance without a degree other than startups, where it's like, a meritocracy where if you can do it and you can bring something to the table, they'll give you a shot at it. Ended up doing my high school equivalent on, with the help of my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And I kind of did my high school education when I was 21. Got to a point where I was like, okay, I can either hop into college, take on a bunch of debt and start there, or I can try to figure something out the same way I figured out the miles thing. So ended up I was living in Israel at the time, moved there when I was 22 and found this company that was a Kickstarter brand. They were selling luggage, and in my brain, it was like, if you love travel, you definitely love luggage. Took me about 4 years to realize I really hated luggage, but it was quite a journey. And I started there in 2016, and they had started this Kickstarter campaign in 2014, and they had not even started production yet. So they had about 1,600 customers in 65 countries that all wanted a refund. They had took all that money, spent it on research and development, couldn't give a refund, and they were just at this crossroads where they had to keep people happy, had nothing to offer them. The only thing I had to offer at that point in time was the fact that I was a native English speaker, and so many of their customers were from the States. So I was like, I'll give it a go. I'll hop in. And my hypothesis then was like, I knew nothing about experience. The only thing I knew is that the people that back a Kickstarter project, they're not necessarily looking for the product tomorrow, but what they are looking for is being part of the process of creating this. And by not giving them the information and not being transparent, you are kind of defeating the purpose that they joined for. So my logic was, let's try to just go full on transparent and say, we've been totally lying to you. And this is what's really going on, and get the founder to go front and center and do like a Facebook Live. And it kind of worked. And people were like, okay, let's rally together and finish this thing. And pretty much a year and a half later, we ended up sending all that out, doing a version 2, and like 90-something% of the people that hated us at version 1 hopped into version 2. And pretty much what I took out of that is it's not rocket science, and it's all about really deeply understanding people and not creating this company barrier. And that was kind of I got off to the races. At that point, I was doing 19 jobs. It was a tiny company, and I spent some time doing ops and logistics, getting all these suitcases to all these different countries, did a bunch of sales and business development, investor relations, marketing strategy, just about everything. In 2016, 2017, the thing that I kept seeing across startups was that the hot, cool thing was growth and acquisition, and people were just hopping into Facebook and hopping into Snapchat, and the ads platforms were buzzing. But what there was very, very little to no focus on was the retention side of things, where retention was always poured into the marketing side of the business, where when people leave, we spend money to acquire them again. The flip side of all of this that I was seeing then was that every year, Facebook just turns that dial a little bit more, and ads get a little bit more expensive. And then Snapchat follows shortly after, and just about every other platform follows along. And what I thought was, imagine we used experience as a vessel of understanding how to keep people here because they're telling us that every day. And we kind of connect retention with experience. That was my vision back then. And after kind of a long winded journey, ended up having, pandemic hit, luggage wasn't a hot topic. Transitioned back into the US startup scene, and a couple of months into 2020, I found OLIPOP, and pretty much from the first conversation with my boss, who's David, who's the co-founder, we kind of had this conversation where the future of growth in a company is actually retention and experience. And that's kind of how businesses can level up against the competitors. And that was kind of, we've been killing it ever since.
Thank you for sharing that story. I feel like I was right there with you, just following you along. I can't even imagine like the 2021 just traveling the world. That's wow. You mentioned something that I wanna dive into. You mentioned competition. So what makes Olipop's customer experience different than, let's say, your competition?
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about experience as a whole is that generally experience is viewed as the way to solve a problem. That when something comes up, customer experience, customer support, customer service, whatever you want to call it, is always a game of whack-a-mole, where it's like an issue comes up and the rep will solve it. I think what we transitioned into at Olipop, or what our goal is to view experience as community building and as engaging and as creating relationships. So our view on experience, we're selling a pretty expensive product, and people that purchase it thinking it's something and get it and they're like, this tastes like absolute garbage. We're not trying to create an environment where they have to like the product, but we're creating an environment where the interaction that we'll have with them will kind of blow their mind. They'll be like, wow, they really care. And whether or not, when their friend says, hey, I'm going to the store, I heard about this thing called Olipop, instead of saying, oh, that tastes like garbage, they'll say, it wasn't something I loved, but people love it, and they were so sweet when I engaged with them. So that's our vision. And I think just about every brand in our space, or just in general in the startup world, invests in customer experience last. The first investment is always on product, and then on growth, and then on more growth, and experience is usually outsourced. And they'll be like, we care a ton about experience, but we pay people $4 an hour offshore to do it. So what we're doing at Olipop is putting, in a team of 30 something people, we have 4 of them on customer experience. So we're highly leveraging our team of customer experience to make sure that whether or not they love or hate our product, they are mind blown with the engagement they had with us. And that's kind of our view. We don't look for shortcuts. We're not looking for any of that stuff. We're looking to engage like people.
How do you differentiate? I mean, for this is like new territory for me, but is there even a difference between customer support and customer experience, or what is the like
Yeah,
tactical difference there?
yeah. I think the main, in my opinion, I think different people have different answers. I think in my opinion, customer service is the whack-a-mole, is the putting out fires, is the answering emails about where's my order. Customer experience is the collection of, is the proactivity of being able to constantly look to create relationships even when people aren't reaching out about where's my order. And I think B is using this tool of experience, using it to take the feedback. When you think about companies that are pretty new and early on and they outsource customer experience, sometimes what they're forfeiting is the data that comes in. A customer will be like, I got this product and here's what's wrong with it, or I got this product and here's what's right with it. And all that data just goes into a garbage. So what we think about is, when we look at experience, is like, how can we be proactive and take that data and get it all across the business? So it might not be me, but somebody from my team is in every single cross-functional meeting. So if we're having the weekly ops meeting, or the meeting with our 3PL, or the weekly marketing meeting, or whatever it may be, there's always like, what would the customer say? And that's our job. Like, what would the customer think about this, that, and the other, is something we can share from the thousands of messages we get a week.
I also meant to say I'm personally a big OLIPOP fan. I can't
Thank
imagine
you.
someone thinking that it tastes bad. It tastes so good.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
it tastes very good. Um, Another question that we got, and you might have answered this with your previous answer, but do you have any tactics, I mean, as much as you can share, about retention? Like, are there any tips that our founders can utilize or even like implement like this week or today?
Yeah, I think retention I guess there's a few things. I think number one, retention is usually viewed as what you do when the customer leaves. Even though the word retention means keeping people there, it's generally how to win people back. I think the core thing that I look at is, how can we keep people here and make sure that they're not leaving? And that sounds a lot easier than it is. I think there's a couple of different components to it. I think number one is really listening. So I think that what we sometimes do when we're putting out a fire is just look for, like, okay, how do we fix this, without understanding what's between the lines. When a customer says, like, I got this product and it just doesn't feel like it's worth whatever, or it doesn't feel like, a lot of the times, for example, like, let me give you an example. When they say, like, I got this product and it took so long and it's so expensive, they're not saying just that the product's expensive. They're saying that if I pay for a certain product at a certain price point, I expect to have it faster. And that's the kind of action item from it. So that's number one, is I think constantly looking and being proactive to understand what can we do to make sure people stick around longer is number one. Number two, I think follow-ups. I think follow-ups are often, something we don't think about, because we're always looking at this as a whack-a-mole tactic, as like putting out a fire. Um, Someone from my team is here, Ariel. She's like the absolute queen at this. But kind of, when you see a situation that comes up and a customer's having some sort of dilemma, and you solve it, putting that ticket on snooze so you can check back 4 days later and make sure everything worked out well, is like the most underrated and easy tactic that will grow brand affinity 10x. And it goes from, like, this customer was like okay with our experience that we offered, and now they're like, oh my god, like, I don't even know how they did this, but they're like, like, they're all over it. And I think that sometimes brands are always looking to, like, resolve issues, and it's ironic, but sometimes when things get screwed up, it's the way we fix it that makes people fall in love with our brand 10 times more.
That's such a good tactical tip, because I feel like a lot of our founders do for like customer support or responding to, taking those fires out, like we all kind of do it, but then following up like a week later, a couple of days later, being like, just wanted to make sure you're good. Like that is a gold tip. Another question that we got was, what's your personal favorite interaction that you've had with an individual customer so far?
Yeah. Wow, that's a tough one. There are quite a few. I think the one that was most meaningful to us, which I've shared a couple of times on one or two podcasts that I did recently, was we had a customer reach out, and this is also kind of tying into the same, always trying to understand the context. Like, I think, when when somebody's frustrated, is generally not the one thing that they're saying it is. It's usually more than that. So we had a customer reach out and say that they wanted to cancel their subscription, and when we just generally, when someone reaches out, we'll cancel it, and then we'll ask, is there any feedback you want to provide, or is there anything we can help with? And basically what we understood from the story was that she had a subscription for her mom, who was in hospice care towards the end of her life, and they were being extremely careful with the things that she was eating and drinking, and she was really just missing root beer. And for her, that was something that was super nostalgic, and something that brought her back 30 years earlier. And she stumbled upon OLIPOP and purchased it for her mom, and that was kind of the way she described it. It was the happiest part of her mom's day. And for us, that was like, obviously, like the whole team was kind of in tears. That was super humbling, right? Where as a soda brand, you think about making people happy, delivering something that's delicious. You don't think about something that makes someone's day when they're in a space like that. And that was obviously super meaningful. And we took a page out of the Zappos and the Chewies of the world, and we sent her a bouquet of flowers and a card from the team. But that for us was probably the most meaningful story in my career, honestly. Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind.
That is a pretty powerful story. You never know how or in what ways like your business or your service could affect people. Another question is, this is also an interesting one. What would you do differently if you were launching OLIPOP today?
Yeah. I think I love this question, because I think that when it comes to startups and when it comes to a company that's growing at our speed, you just never stop to think what you would have done differently. So I think that the thing that comes to mind is, I think as a whole, we leverage customer insights a lot. Like we'll pull analytics and statistics and tags and all that stuff. But I think one of the best things we've done is brought in a consultant to help with insights that worked at StubHub, and having like a more formalized kind of like, now we have like a couple hundred people that are on a list, and we send them surveys, and just kind of getting the qualitative and quantitative data. If we would start again tomorrow, I'd want to start that even earlier. I think when on the brand side of things, we're always like, customers love this, and 9 out of 10 times you're wrong, because that's what you love, but you never stop for a second to ask customers, is this something that's impactful? And that's come up on our end so many times. A perfect example, it's even something as small as this, but we had asked our subscribers that subscribe to OLIPOP monthly. We asked them, like, we took a survey of things that they would appreciate, and you offer like your Facebook group and your this, that, and the other, and the thing that came up was like a cool little sticker was like something that people enjoyed. And we created these little canned stickers that are on our Instagram, and everyone was like blown away at the response to it. Where like, these are like our most liked photos on Instagram, and we get multiple emails a week about people loving their stickers. And you think about, like, in the scheme of things, that's not the thing you would think would make the biggest impact. So I think just listening and asking, I don't think there's any dumb question to ask customers, is this something you'd appreciate, or is this something you'd like? So that's been pretty big for us.
Another question is, how do you get customers to repurchase?
Yeah. I had interesting conversation with the team at Recharge the other week about just we were talking about in general of like keeping people on a subscription, but just retention in general and repurchasing, I think is interesting because I think we oftentimes think that if somebody likes a product, they'll repurchase it. And I think that it's not necessarily like that. I think there's a whole bunch of components that goes into repurchasing a product. I think there's, obviously liking the product. There's the fact that the perceived value in the product. There's, do you think, did your experience from point A to point, all the way till the end, did it kind of check out as well as you wanted it to? So I think what we're focusing front and center when you think about repurchase, we're focusing on making sure that every single part of the customer journey, from seeing our ad on Facebook to the product page to the site experience in general to shipping and delivery to customer experience if something gets messed up, everything from beginning to end, we're focusing on delivering what we promised and expectation versus reality. So I think, you think of a lot of brands that can sell a crazy amount of product because they made it look 6 times better on their ads. And that ends up like you'll sell a lot today, but tomorrow you'll be in a different place. So we, perfect an example of that was, we were seeing that the more we were talking about, on specific channels, we were just putting these like glorious pour shots of like, soda and it with ice and all that stuff. And basically we were getting customers that were thinking that this is exactly like a 39 gram of sugar soda, and they purchased it not even knowing that it was low sugar or has 5 grams of sugar versus 39, and they taste it and they'd be like, this doesn't taste like Coke. And that didn't do what we wanted it to do. We want to be delivering meeting or exceeding expectations throughout the entire journey. So when we just flip that script to like, this is the best tasting healthy or healthier alternative you'll ever see, all of a sudden repurchase rate rocketed. So it's about figuring out messaging all across the journey that's exactly what they're expecting, and then overachieving that is level 2 and 3, but making sure that they're getting what they think they're getting is generally the cause to repurchase. And I think on that note, the one thing I'd add is that people, what I see often is brands that offer a subscription will be like, this is 10 or 15% off monthly, but you have to lock in for 3 months, or you have to lock in for X amount of months because it doesn't work for us for you to, buy and cancel. And on our end, it's like, if you bought this at 15% off and you kind of did your cancel on the same day that you ordered, if you buy the product, you love the product, you're going to repurchase. And if you repurchase at full price, that's not going to make sense because you bought your first one at 50% off. So you'll probably be right back into the subscription if we deliver on the product and experience the same way we want to. So we're aiming for a year. We're not looking to kind of spin up the spend, spin up the amount of orders, and then have all these people not come back.
How do you do all this when, let's say, you're a one-woman show or a one-man show? We have a lot of solo founders or founders who are in their first year and they have 10 million jobs. How do you do it when it's just you or you have a relatively small team?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. I think the thing I focus on most is there are so many tools that are like, Gorgias is an example, Gorgias, which is an email ticketing platform that they leverage a lot of AI and just using macros and canned responses. And I think canned responses get a bad rap because it feels like a robot. But what I recommend is generally taking these canned responses and adding in the customer's name or the customer's order number, and there are plenty of automations that can help you do that as well, but adding a personal touch to a larger picture. So instead of it taking you 10 hours, it'll take you an hour, but it still feels like a human. And, people will often be like, for the first year, I'm going to use Gmail. And the great part about Gmail is that it's free, the negative part is that once you start investing a little bit of money into a software, you're never going to be able to pull back all the data that you were collecting in the first year. So I think that being able to have a tool that can kind of give you that data as you grow, and figuring out a pricing model that obviously makes sense. It doesn't have to be gorgeous, but any sort of ticketing platform that you can leverage those canned responses, leverage a little bit of AI and predictive typing, that you're not typing full messages, and then being able to track these things goes a really, really, really long way. I think, as we add on more members to this team, we're thinking, what can we go above and beyond, and what kind of gifts can we send, and what kind of experiences can we create, and what kind of community can we build. But I think day one, that was like my first focus, is building out the framework of all these responses. And if everyone was out for a week and it was just me, I think I'd still be able to handle it today, because of the kind of the basic automations that we put into place.
Are there any other platforms, like similar platforms, you would recommend?
I think I'm more light on technology than most people in this space. We don't use that many tools. I think the other tool, which is actually free, that I think is useful as you're growing from 1 to 2 to 3, is a tool called Guru. I think it's getguru.com, which is like a kind of like a knowledge base that's also a Chrome extension. So you can kind of, for us, it's like caffeine, and it'll be like 6 lines about the, vintage cola has caffeine, it has this amount of milligrams, it comes from this. So you can kind of hop in, and if you join today, you'd still have all the information that any other person on the team has. And again, cross function also, giving that access to the person that works in any part of the business, so they can see everything about anything in one central place. I think that's pretty much it on technology, from my perspective.
Here's a fun question. What is your favorite flavor and why? Or you can't say.
Tough one. No, I think at the moment my current favorite is the orange squeeze. I think at first sip, it kind of took me off guard, because I was expecting like a Fanta, and it's less like, it's more like an Orangina. It's like it's more like an orange juice kind of vibe. Than I'm into that one. And then I guess my second favorite, I really like the strawberry vanilla. I think it's also an interesting one, because it's like one of our best sellers, and some people absolutely hate it, and the people that love it are like ready to fight them. It's an interesting one, but I think it's kind of like what we always say is, go with the one that sounds like something you'll like, and you're probably going to be right. If it's like, if you like the root beer, you'll like our root beer. If you're more of a cola kind of person, you'll probably be happy with that. But yeah.
Are you coming out with any new flavors?
We actually have we haven't even announced it quite yet, but we have a summer exclusive coming out in the middle to end of this month. It's like an orange creamsicle kind of summer exclusive. It's a limited edition. And that's, I honestly, between the couple of us, I haven't even tried it yet, but I think it should be a winner. Ben, who's our CEO and formulator, hasn't missed yet, so we're excited about that one, and that should be over the next couple of weeks. So,
did you see my eyes just light up? I'm like, that is my favorite ice cream of all time. I'm
right.
So excited.
A lot of nostalgia.
I feel very honored that we get to hear the inside scoop. All right, I know we had a lot of signups for this event, and a ton of people having a ton of questions. So I'm just gonna open it up to Q&A. So if you're attending and you have any other questions that we haven't addressed yet, feel free to put them in the
Elizabeth, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, you're
I was
fine.
just saying, if you have any questions, put them in the chat.
That is a couplet glass.
Mickey, do you have one too?
Yes, it seems like Mickey knows a friend of mine. Yes, Geffen, who just launched a coffee startup.
Mickey knows everybody. All right, let me know if you have any questions. You can ask everything, anything about customer experience, retention. Do you have any tips on branding? And I'm personally asking because I love OLIPOP's brand. I'm
Yeah,
obsessed with that.
I'm not a big branding person, but what I can say is something that I've seen at Olipop that I haven't seen anywhere else is the level of intentionality. I think that I have, as busy as we are or as crazy as things are, I've yet to see anything kind of just slip in. Like nothing gets missed. And I think that we've oftentimes skipped a large activation because we couldn't do it perfectly. And I think most brands think about, like, let's just get this all in, versus skipping out half of it and doing the other half really well. I think that's something that comes up pretty often. David, who's the other co-founder, is on the marketing side, spent a bunch of years at Diageo with Johnny Walker and all that stuff. And his thing is always like, if you can't do it perfectly, just save it for next year. So we are pretty rigorous. Everything goes, every single design goes through a bunch of revisions, and every piece of copy goes through a bunch of people. Every email design, it's pretty obsessive. So maybe even a little too obsessive. So I think that's the trick at Olipop.
Okay, the questions are trickling in. All right, here's a good one. You mentioned surveys, but when you say listen to your customers, what are your favorite and cost-effective strategies to listen to your customers, and how do you usually execute these initiatives?
Well, that's an awesome question. I think that there's nothing that's cheaper and simpler than literally just creating a Google Doc and writing down the amount of times the question comes in, or a comment comes in, like something that we started tracking over probably 8 to 10 months ago was people saying that they wanted it to be more carbonated. And that was, for us, it was like, we weren't looking for something as fizzy as Coke. We kind of liked the fact that it was a little less on the fizzy side, but then you start taking those pieces apart, where we started tracking which flavors are the people asking for more carbonation on. Is it the vintage cola because they're kind of comparing it to the level of carbonation in Coke versus the fruity flavors that they were okay with? So just kind of taking those things apart. I think the other thing I think about is less about quantitative and more about qualitative, is listening, is just when you hear something, as the person on the brand side, you're like, maybe this customer is just a little crazy. Like, and we've had a perfect example for that is a couple of months ago, we had someone say that they were drinking root beer and it tasted like vintage cola. And you hear, or it was the opposite. They were drinking vintage cola and it tastes like root beer. And you hear that and you're like, there is no way. And I sent this message over to our ops team, and they're like, that's not even possible. They were produced on 2 different days. That's crazy. And right off the bat, you're like, okay, like, let's just toss that away. And then you think for a second, you're like, why would somebody, like, those are not 2 flavors you'd mistake. Like, just take them seriously. And turns out there was a mishap, and a couple of cases were affected, and we ended up, because of this customer, we ended up catching it before only if like 4 or 5 cases or whatever it was got out, and we ended up just saving ourselves a big old mess by listening. So taking every single piece of feedback and sending it to where it has to go, especially when you're at the early stage of the company, is probably the best advice I can give on that.
And next question is, how do you collect information from customers that buy your product in traditional brick and mortar? Which you guys do as well, right? You sell in stores?
Yeah. I think when I started in June, we were about 90% retail, 10% e-commerce. Now we're about 60-40 on retail. So we have a very large retail operation. I think it's super hard to collect that kind of data. What we have done recently is we've done some like, free can coupons with like programs like Social Nature, et cetera, and gotten some surveys from people that, in order to get the free can, you would have to fill out some information. So we survey a little bit. I think our biggest flywheel is actually the opposite, where a lot of people will try our product online because it's not yet in the store near them. They'll kind of get hooked to OLIPOP, and then they'll hop on our store locator and see that it just launched in a Kroger near them or a Sprouts near them. So we see a lot of cross-pollination between retail and e-com, where we constantly survey the other way, where we ask people on e-commerce where they found us, and they'll say, I found you in a store, but I wanted to order by the case, or I didn't want to kind of tug it from the store to my house, and found that I can order, on subscription, and it'll be the same price it is in retail with free shipping. So I don't know if I have a perfect answer to that.
The next one is a juicy one. This one says, what are your tips for dealing and ultimately retaining a very pissed off customer for whatever reason that reaches out, or an overly active negative person on social media that is disparaging your brand?
This is it's a really good question and a very long-winded answer. But I think the basic idea that I'm looking for is what's underneath it. What is causing that frustration? And I can toss over a couple of tips. I think number one, 95% of brands reply to angry people with a bunch of we's. We apologize for this, we apologize for that. And there's always a disconnect between, customers are always like, screw the brand, they're just messing everyone up, et cetera, et cetera. And 9 times out of 10, when it's like, hey, this is Eli, I heard that this and this and this happened, I apologize for this and that and the other, here's what I can do to resolve it. 9 out of 10 times that big ball of air just deflates, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that you would do that. So that's number one. I think pulling out the we's and switching it to I is pretty worthwhile. And the other thing I'd say is that we are really lucky that we're in a space where we don't get that many of those. But I have, when I was at this luggage brand that people were 4 years or 3 years delayed on an order, we were definitely getting a lot of those. And I think that, some companies have the luxury of being able to refund it, and others don't, either because the product's too expensive or because they don't have that kind of cash to refund orders whenever people are frustrated. So I'd say focus on bringing humanity to the picture and really explaining. So, and you see this with the largest brands, where you'll say you have an issue and they'll just send back the same generic response, and you're getting super frustrated and emotional, and you'll send back like, this is the worst experience ever, and they'll be like, we are so sorry for the frustration, and you just want to smash your computer because you're like, this is not human. Like, you're just clicking the same canned response over and over, and the second you break the script, it usually ruffles some feathers. And I don't think we've had I can't think of any customer that hasn't worked for. And there is an interesting story that comes to mind where for me, this was probably one of the more difficult instances, not because of how difficult this person was, more because it was just something that kept coming up. We were very early on with our same day delivery, and this was a free offering, and it still is, where we offer in certain locales, we offer free delivery with same day or next day. And we had this, it usually gets delivered via Postmates or something like that. And we had this customer that ordered like 10 times, and like 3 out of 10 times he had an issue where it wasn't delivered or it was left in the wrong place, or and he was sending like very very long-winded emails about how frustrated he is, and I totally understood his frustration, and you kind of go with this in the middle of like, we apologize, or I apologize, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also a third party courier that we just started working with, and we're aiming to fix all this, and you got refunded every time this happened, plus got the free product, and you try to be rational, and it just wasn't working. And the common theme I kept seeing is, you know, I always talk about reading between the lines. The common thing I kept seeing is he kept bringing up the fact that in Japan this never happens, and in Japan this would never happen. And it was interesting because I didn't quite understand, you know, and he kept bringing up this context about how he was a chef in Japan for so many years, and service, and I ended up like spending an hour online to try to understand the psychology of, I obviously know enough about the culture in, you know, in Japan with regards to respect and all that. And I was trying to deeply understand how they would resolve something like this, how they would apologize. And I ended up crafting this very long-winded, might I say, Japanese style apology. And it worked like a charm. And this guy is like, he's like one of our favorites. I think he's ordered like 25 times, and it just was like fascinating to see that the more you kind of morph to what people want to hear without being super conniving or manipulative, just being genuine, it kind of works. So I guess that's all I got on
What did
that.
you put in that apology? Now I'm curious. What
Yeah, I
makes an
mean,
apology Japanese style?
yeah, I think the common theme that I kept seeing was he was looking for someone to really accept the wrong we did and not brush it away and push it on a courier. And even though it had nothing to do with us, he wanted us to take full responsibility and not even mention the courier in the picture.
Mm.
And he wanted us to just be, we are doing everything we can. He wanted to see data behind it, as well as like, what are things you're doing to make sure this doesn't happen again. So I sent him a couple of bullet points of things that I'm actively doing to make sure this doesn't come up. I sent him the name of the person at the courier company who I spoke to and the steps that they're taking. I gave a lot of details and was very respectful. And it seemed to work better than anything else I've done. So I think that's the other thing, is like, unlearn whatever you think always works and be open to trying something different and new.
That is such a fun story. I'm Korean, and they have a similar thing in Korea too. They call it service, which is just service with a Korean accent. But yeah, so that just makes me laugh. I could
Yeah.
totally see that happening. Um, yeah, if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. We still have a couple of minutes left. Let's see what other questions we have. Or any other tips you would like to share as well.
Well, I see Caitlin asked a question about macros. What's too big or too small? I think that this is something we talk about pretty often on our team. You know, I think when it comes to any sort of data collection and automations, you're always thinking about how can we make it conducive that these tags actually mean something. Like if we have 900 tags, it's very hard to parse together any sort of data. So you want to create tags so you can collect information. You don't want to have too many tags so that it doesn't mean anything. I want to know that if I have 19 tags of X, I know that this is an issue that happened 19 times. And then when it comes to macros, is like, I've seen businesses that have 100, and I've seen businesses that have 4. So it all kind of depends on what kind of issue comes in pretty often. But if there's a question that comes in multiple times a day, and you see it as a time saver to create a macro, I'd say go for it. It's kind of, it'll definitely take you some work at the up front, but if it's a question that comes a couple of times a day and you're saving time by creating the macro, I'd say go for it. I mean, I have another couple of things I can chat about if we don't have questions. Something else I think that comes up very often in conversations about CX or customer experience is hiring. I think that hiring for customer experience, as I'm not just saying this, I'm saying this as somebody that's worked in just about every part of the business other than finance. I think that customer experience is the hardest job. I think that if you're good at customer experience, it means you have enough empathy to read between the lines. And if you have that kind of extra dose of empathy, it really messes you up when you can't fix something. So we've had plenty of stories where something doesn't arrive and somebody's leaving on a trip or has a wedding or whatever, and there's nothing you can do. You're not going to, you know, jump across the country to deliver it. And those situations will really, really frustrate you. So I think that what I generally hear is that people view customer experience as like a starting role in any company, that if they have no experience doing anything, they should jump into customer experience. And what you usually see is those people get really, really, really burnt out really quickly. So I'd say that when looking to hire, look for people that are obsessed with creating a better experience for consumers. And some of them will be like, I'm super extroverted and I love talking to people, which candidly, I'm super introverted and I get very anxious talking to people. And I think it's less about personality and make sure they understand that this is not a job where you just get to have fun talking to people, because a solid 90% of the people writing in are actually angry. And it's a lot more de-escalation than having fun conversation. So that's something I focus on, is really, really making sure that the person has a very clear idea as to what working in this role is, and then really making sure that people have the time and space to kind of recharge. Like often brands are like, oh, this person has an hour in the middle of the day, like that's crazy, we should fire half our team so that, you know, they work 10 hours. And the reality is it's not about clicking to type a message. A day in the inbox is really, really, really can wipe you out, right? It's just a lot of engagement and a lot of fixing and a lot of de-escalation. So I think that making sure that people have a way to kind of get their zen or relax or take off, and something I encourage a lot for people to take pay time off at least a day a month. Make sure they get some time on weekends to relax and recharge, and kind of, you know, the quiet time is prep time.
Okay, we're getting more questions in, and here's a longer one from a founder. He says, I'm working on launching a marketplace. Is it more important to have more options for customers to choose from so they can find what they're specifically looking for or want, or to have fewer but really good solid options that can help ensure a great customer experience?
I think that's a good question. I think it probably depends on the product. I think with soda, we generally think about cannibalization versus how many products there are. Whenever we add a new product, we're always looking, is this incremental sales, or is this, you know, when we launch, you know, root beer, did we bring on new customers that are interested, or did we just sell half the amount of vintage cola and sell more root beer? So I'd say start slow and create really, really, really good options, and then see what works. And if something comes in, I'd say it's easy to get lost in the sauce to create a new product for every single person. I'm more in the camp of starting slow and being very intentional with the product. And then the analogy with soda, I'd say fewer flavors that are spot on versus a bunch that are kind of all over the place to capture any audience. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of a vision of, do you want people to get hooked on their forever flavor, or do you want people to buy once and never come back because it was just okay? So you want to create the best products, and if you have less people that purchase more often, you'd rather have that than paying to acquire new customers every single day. So few and great, I'd lean towards.
Don't get lost in the sauce. I love that.
Yeah.
Carla asked, could you share examples of things you have done to create unique and unexpected experiences that add value to your customers and might create word of mouth referrals?
Thanks for that question, Carla. Yeah, I think that I love the question because it's something that we're obsessed with. We love the idea of creating moments. There was a book I read about 6 months ago from Dan and Heath. I forgot the last name, but it's called Moments. And it was just about how creating unexpected moments really drives brand affinity. We think a lot about the Zappos of the world, and something that comes up with the pet food brand Chewy is that what I've seen is that they will send flowers or gifts to people when their pet dies. And if you think about that, or when their pet passes along, and you think about that, that's like in marketing speak, that's the end of a journey for a customer. Like that's like they're probably not going to be back tomorrow purchasing. So it's a weird time to invest. And they're investing in relationships. So whether or not you ever have another pet, they're investing in the way you talk about Chewy. And everyone who you talk to that has been a customer of Chewy has positive things to say. So we love the idea of unexpected, and we love the idea of creating, a mythical kind of thing around it. We've done quite a few of these. We've sent 65 customers snake plants a couple of months ago with a card that was just out of the blue that they didn't expect. We've actually done that twice. We've done sweatshirts. We've done blankets. I think most brands, when they think about how can they surprise and delight, they think about sending more of their own product. It's usually a sample of something that they want you to purchase. And that's not surprise and delight. That's old-fashioned upselling. So we try to focus on, it's not our product. It's something that we purchased to send to you. And it usually comes with a nice card. And the idea is that you generally you expect, like when you move into a new house, the broker or the landlord will buy you a bottle of wine. You don't expect the soda company to send you a blanket and a card that costs as much as your case of soda costed. So we try to create a situation where when people get it and they're like, wow, that's ridiculous, that's wild. And if they told 10 people about it and 5 of those people became customers of ours that stick around, that made it well worth it. But even if they told nobody about it, they'll be here for a while. So it's funny because the question that always comes from our data analysts and from that side of the business is, can you measure it? And my answer is always, I don't care. That always ends up in an uncomfortable conversation because why are you not measuring it? And in my head, it's like, I'm creating experiences. It's hard. You can't measure who they're telling about it anyway. But what you do know is if you got something from a brand that you purchased soda from that made you smile, you'll tell people about it. And there's no way you can measure that, but we know that works. So that's that. Yeah.
For the snake plant examples, I have so many questions. Question number one, how did you choose like which customers to send it out to? And then number two, how did you land on the plant as a choice or anything else?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my thought process was I first optimize people that are part of our subscription community because I feel like those are the people closest to our brand that chose to have a longer commitment with us. So it feels more appropriate than just a one-time customer that gets something in the mail. It kind of feels weird. So I'm optimizing for people that have joined our subscription community and generally optimizing. I don't want the highest spenders because that feels like if you spend a certain amount of money, you get a gift. It's not what this is. So it's usually someone that has been with us for 2 or 3 months and not 10 months. So it's usually somewhere in that bracket. And then I'll just at random choose 60 people. And the idea of the gift came from, we were just talking, my team and I, we were just talking like, what's something that isn't ridiculously expensive, but sticks around for a while, and you'll remember us every time you see it. And that was like plant was like, that's a no-brainer, right? Like it's like it'll be here. And then we thought of like somebody like me who's absolutely the worst at dealing with plants. What's a plant that even I can't kill? And that was a snake plant. It's just super easy to handle. Anyone can have it in their house and keep it around. And that's kind of how that became.
Wow, that's very funny. I also have a snake plant and I'm pretty sure it's dying. So I don't know what that says about me, but
You
love that idea.
you may be watering it too much.
I think so too. Yeah, I
Less
think
water.
so too. Okay, I think this is our last question for today from Daniel. He says, what advice do you have on finding the right spokesperson for your brand?
I think that's a very important question. What I see a lot is that brands will take actors and actresses or somebody that's very popular as the spokesperson for your brand. And I'd advise I'd advise slightly against that. And I'd advise to only collaborate with somebody that feels like an authentic collaboration. And it feels right. So something we see very often on we do a lot of influencer spending, and we pay a lot of people to do swipe ups on Instagram, and the ones that feel the most authentic do tenfold the amount of revenue. So some of the large influencers that we paid $25,000 or $30,000 for a couple of story posts didn't even pay back in the amount of sales they did, because it just felt like they are doing collaborations with 10 different brands a week. And it didn't feel like when they're saying like, I love this brand, most of their audience is like, whatever, like you don't even know what this brand is. Like, you're just like, every day it's a different brand you love. And then the smaller, like some of the smaller influencers that are just, what you call like a micro influencer that have like 5 or 7 or 8,000 followers, but they actually know everyone that follows them. And they actually are on a journey to have less sugar in their diet. And they actually do talk about fiber. Those collaborations just knock it out of the park every time. So I think I'd say the same thing with spokesperson, is someone that it feels super authentic. Will always do 10 times better than the person that just has a lot of followers, because followers is potentially just a bunch of people that think that this person has an interesting life, that they look at that person's feed whenever they want to feel like garbage about themselves. So I'd focus on something that feels really authentic and real.